I guess I could say a lot or a little, depending on how you want to look at it. Thank you for speaking with me, and I think this is a good view or perspective into the situation, because everybody gets caught up in a lot of advanced technology and secret operations and cabal and Illuminati secret groups. Basically, a lot of negative stuff. And even though looking at timeline shifts or scalar weaponry, things like that, has a negative kind of like an angle to it, it's, in my opinion, primarily positive, because we're looking at what we can do with it and what it means to us, and as well looking at things in the way of a more organic, if you will, perspective of what it means from an energetic or spiritual. It basically just means psychological. It's just the Western view of psychology, more or less literally just with the Eastern view combined. We don't really have to go too far outside of literal academic Eastern thinking in order to get right into what is considered in the West spirituality and in some cases nonsense, but in that sense comes the dichotomy, the battle, the difference and the divide between the East and the West, and literally the two hemispherical ways of describing mentalism with intuition or logic and analysis. But the two are always intricately combined. There's really no difference in that sense, and I mean, it's the perspective that we hold, looking at like an orb, if you will, from different angles, that creates that right and left divide, which is actually the same reality, same thing. But in that kind of introduction to what I hope to begin to talk about, that's where we have like the Western view, where a lot of it is focused so intently on what seems to be physical and basically contrasting or like competitive or combative perspectives of what's happening. It's always a battle. It's always us versus them, the rich versus the has-beens or never were, or the commoners. There's always a sense of divide there. And so in taking a step back from this dichotomy, this parallel, and coming just to what it means in our lives as we grow and develop over time, as we come to know what is simply basically cosmic psychology, what we all have to do with directly in the choices that we make every day, that's what's going to get us into a new paradigm, to use a completely corrupted and overly laden word, but that's what's going to get changed. Everything else is kind of this parroting of a kind of narrative sitcom for reality, which, in my opinion, has poisoned the natural well of knowledge and creativity that all you have to do to access is look within and utilize your own natural abilities to create using your mind. With that said, in my perspective, there has been previous changes that seem to begin to solidify in the past 2 years, and I began speaking publicly with my face. I've always been doing it in some way or another, but I put my face behind it basically in February of 2016 or so, and I noticed, I've written about this and I've said this before to at least one other person, that I noticed a crazy deal of change happening then. That was part of why I began to speak directly. Later that year, it kind of, for me, evened out and not much was happening into November, December. A lot of people said they noticed a lot of stuff happening in December. For me, that was kind of like a null point, but in that sense, maybe that's a time of great change, and that's just how I experienced that, which is everybody's different, and it's just like a seesaw, how we all work. There's always going to be somebody feeling something different or opposite to what somebody else feels. That's how it kind of works. That's kind of what keeps the perpetual motion machine of our minds going. If we were all 100% like a magnet, polarized one way then the other way at the same time, there would be no variant. We wouldn't know we were polarized one way or the other, because there would be no difference between us. So always there's this type of trend of variation, and then you have this wave of what the masses basically feel throughout that, and through that we get these ages and epochs of highs and lows and different tendencies and habits in what we experience as a culture, or like a mass culture. But after that, like the beginning of 2017, it basically got real weird, and a lot of people their memories were changing, my memories were changing. I was getting basically the previous run-up from 7 years of what I experienced. It began to alter, and this is what we were told was going to happen, that around this time, the same changes that were happening in 2003, 1999, 2012, 13, apparently back into the 80s, 86, 89, there were these cycles of change that built up, and it resulted in everybody who was seemingly, aware of what was happening with these energies, of these refined senses, waking up and going, why is everything different? What happened? Something happened, we can't see what happened, but it's as if somebody switched everything around and, at night, and the conscious mind has no way of looking back and as if there's a recording and seeing every single day and noticing what's different, but it's clearly obvious that if you were to sense, through a beyond the physical capacity for perceiving, which is what the spirit is all about, it's simply the brain and body, the physical, and then beyond that is the spiritual senses. It is as if somebody changed enough finite little details to result in a literally modulated different reality based upon some kind of ideals that no one can quite put their finger on, but is apparent to just about everyone who seems to look, which is the strangest thing, of course. What we were told about these, we were briefed on these, and they're apparently a part of an ongoing operation to bring about a resolution to long-term disruptions in the temporal field, which took place beginning in what we call Egypt, Atlantis, what people refer to as Atlantis, and in between those two, Lemuria, apparently, and a type of Pangea, global, or, if you want to use the term global, you could also use the term flat, pancake realm, whatever you want to call it, or inverted extra-dimensional toroid, if you want to be more specific, and that there was some type of civilization that was split up, and this tends to be explained as the result of advanced technology and a spiritual incursion or temporal incursion by what are called invader races. So everything we see now seems to be a result of temporal ripples moving through what we can call or refer to as a fabric of time or a time space. And those who are aware enough to a certain degree, I don't really want to get into the differences of who's aware and who's not, but those who have the ability to sense, which relates to DNA and genetics and things like that, they know these changes are happening. The idea is that it's for a resolution of problems that have been taking place for the entirety of our civilization, to the point where it kind of wrapped up this entire civilization in a paradox, which is basically just saying an unequal or an imbalanced equation which must balance itself out before the entirety of what's happening can resolve itself. Hope I didn't ramble too much there. These are good questions, they're good concepts. I can tell you based upon experiences, and the funny thing is anybody who has an experience outside of this plane is telling you the truth, because you can experience anything outside of this plane. That's the whole point. Maybe it'll get a little weird if they say, and then, something happened here, like they were president last week and everything got switched around and now they're not, or something, like that is questionable. But if somebody says they have another experience in a parallel or basically a higher dimensional realm, well, anything can happen there because it's based upon mind. That's what's outside of the universe, or at least the physical plane. Your way of asking questions, you set up what you do know based upon kind of having a pseudo opening for what you don't know, and that you can be profiled that way. But the idea is that your view, or your beginning view, is pretty much what you would want to have in order to find the truth. People are sold whatever is required to keep them doing just what they're told. So it gets pretty weird, but for the most part, the less intelligent people are, the more simple the outcome and the premise for the lie is and has to be. Which means it's the old saying, I think adage, if what is it? I think reality is stranger than fiction. And it's to the degree where if people who were lied to and given the worst, absolute, horrifying, false version of reality, the true reality would always overwhelm them more. And the main idea is that the physical plane or membrane, or whatever you want to visualize that as, outside of that, meaning outside of this, the boundaries of this temporal spatial dimension, is mind. It's governed by mind. Inside you and outside the physical is just mind. And so, in other words, it's governed by mind, meaning the mind of the observer who is experiencing whatever they're experiencing that is not anchored by the physical laws, basically. You can't experience unless your mind is prepared for it and is seeking that experience, meaning it's as if you're kind of programming that into reality and then having that experience. There's a subconscious conscious interplay, which is simply not tethered to a physical body and the physical realm that the physical body is tethered to, meaning you can cycle through realms and experiences and lifetimes of experience in an imaginative way. And the idea is that everything, it's always, to get to the truth, it's backwards. What is given to the public is 180 degrees from the truth, and this is basically a satanic inversion principle, and it's because if they buy that, if they buy the 100% inversion, then everything in them will want to fight having to turn 100% or 150 degrees or 80 degrees, around and look behind them, because then it's an emotional bias, and that emotional bias sets them up as a mind entrainment protocol or barrier to the point where they're not going to accept the truth even if it slaps them in the face. Or it actually works to enable a very easy ability to traumatize a person, because now all you have to do is show them that their worldview is basically a farce. And we've seen this time and time again. If somebody is in a kind of traumatic experience, even violence or wartime or something, the brain shuts off very rapidly to shield the personality from harmful memories. If you don't need I don't mean to be violent, but guns and say somebody getting shot brutally and killed will traumatize a person who hasn't seen that. You don't need that. If somebody literally saw a being who was not human and is not possible to fit into their worldview, they will literally 100% black that out, walk the other direction, and pretend it never happened. And from there on in their memory, it'll be recorded as if it never happened. That's how it works. The brain will record it in the subconscious, but the conscious mind won't be able to access those memories. It's very easy. It's easier to have a world leader come out and flash somebody and be like, yeah, we own you, we do whatever we want, it's all a game to us, than it is to say through gore and violence, like a bus flipping over and something like that. They're more likely to remember that than they are to face the fact that everything that they believed in this situation is a lie based upon false authority and the people that they literally worship completely treating them like slaves. It's because there's an emotional bias, and the persona then is set up to support that like a pinnacle, and it fractures when that central point is brought out. So the point of that is that if you want the truth, just take what they're telling you and flip it 180 degrees, and that's the truth. And they do that as a message for those who are willing to face the darkness and realize that there's something happening here that's not basically what's being presented at face value. But the point is, because what's happening and what happened with these underground situations and the advanced technology and these breakaway civilizations and what's actually out there is so far from what could be explained in this situation that it would automatically make a person's mind explode. In mainstream reality, it would cause uncontrollable outbursts and psychotic episodes, bipolar disorder, and basically depression, all the psychotic tendencies, schizophrenia, that the only way to maintain this civilization from that point on, which from their point of view is forever because they've always known these things, these controlling factions and things like that, and they even say they're from another civilization, and so that from that point on, you have the continuity of the civilization depends on how well you can lie and how well you can put up a front and make people think their voting counts, basically, and that the corporations care about them and that their money actually means something. And it's the whole thing from then on is a facade. It's an illusion. It's the charades. And the problem is where these certain individuals brought into that situation got completely too greedy and completely too personal about their illusory projected power, and now they don't want to give it up, even when it's time to come to that point where everything can change. And so the point with that is that you really don't want to get to the point where there's a nexus of all things, because at that point your body turns 100% to light. There's no longer an I and a them or anything like that. and it's literally just one complete godhead of experience. But that means there's no longer any us. There's none of this is happening. We don't have TVs. You don't have advanced technology because everything is advanced technology. It's all through mind. You can make everything happen with your mind. Well, at that point, nothing's happening because everything's happening. So there's no you in there to experience that. So the point is, what there is it looks like an hourglass where there's a nexus in the center. And part of this is that you could see in the lie of society, there are terms and conditions and expectations that go on for so long. But where the road of time is going is that it leads to a point where the lie can't be put up with anymore. It has to be unveiled. So what happens is there's a point, say 2 weeks, where there's no more. There's literally no more space. If you were to get in a craft and go 2 weeks from now, you'd hit into a black void because there's nothing there. And so what they'll do is they'll literally have computer systems and teams of individuals use programming and basically mind magic to calculate what can be done next in society, in history, through false flags, where nobody gets hurt at all. There's not even an event. It's 100% on TV, but so many people buy into it and believe in it. It has the desired effect on the collective mind. Certain events. I'm not saying the false flags that people talk about are those, but imagine the ones that nobody talks about, that nobody knows, are those. And so, but those exist. There's evidence of things like that forever. I'm also saying it's not just to get a political agenda, it's to change the mind of humanity. And the point is, they can program events in, and now that cone, that nexus, that point where everything was going to have to be unveiled, it goes 2 weeks down, or 2 years down, or whatever the limit is going to be. And so they're scooping, as they go, through hyperspace, inventing this dimension, inventing this time as they go, using the masses, basically, and programming modalities, huge webs of networks of information and individuals that know just how to interplay on the psychology of people, the desires, needs, wants, and get them to buy and to fight and to support and rabble and do all the crazy stuff that people do, which is what we know as the substance of this society, which is basically the substance of this dimension. So that's part of that idea behind that if it ever gets to a point where the show is no longer basically accepted, then two things are going to happen. And this is what I'm going right down the list, and I don't even look at it, but that's how it's how it's explained. It's the, awaken or not, or don't exist situation. That two things. So basically, we run out of fuel, and people no longer buy the charades, but in the same sense, they don't want the truth. They don't care about anything. They basically begin to fizzle out, and at that point, there's no fight left in the people. The shows, basically, it's all media based. It's competition and basically like degradation based media and debauchery and all this stuff. All of that basically flat out has no effect, and people begin to shut down and stuff like that. Basically, if that happens, the continuation will be dependent on the unveiling. But if people can't handle that because it causes that previously described psychosis, then that would basically be the world. We'd literally watch the world turn up. I mean, I don't know how to describe it. Think of any of these movies or any of these terms. The world turns inside out and goes belly up, and we're all, Anyway, but that's called Armageddon. That's when there's a war of the worlds, and people can't handle the truth. Everything begins to leak out. In previous timelines, it was explained that a satanic super soldier takeover was used to keep things going in that sense, because people didn't want to accept what was happening, but didn't want to do the work to basically contact from a soul level and actually be here empathetically and care about one another and exist in this type of spiritual manner. Because if we're not going to do that, we turn into robots. In the same sense, there's a very powerful system that is capable of telling everyone massively, or over the entire civilization very rapidly with instantaneous feedback, what to do in order to get them to take themselves out, so that it can rule. So that's partially another aspect of this, why you have people who are managing this civilization in teams of behind-the-scenes programmers, because there are invisible threats, and majority of the threats are actually invisible, but that's case in point. You have the visible threats, which are illusions to keep people from realizing that there are invisible threats. But the whole point behind that in this situation is that the other option is the apocalypse, which is where people have come to the awareness of what is without having to be told, without the sky breaking open, without beings landing, without a crazy disaster ripping the planet in half, whatever it is, and that people awaken to the truth without having to be told. And in that sense, it is in a way their spiritual right, their blood right, their birthright, and they're basically it's like a soft Armageddon where it's an awakening, a mass awakening, but people don't turn to violence. They don't turn to wars, and the groups that control people are paid and basically designed, contracted to control people through war and violence. And so there will be temptations and attempts, but if the awareness increases enough, if there's enough self-awareness to basically energetically fund what would be for the first time in how many thousand years, 11,000 or 100,000 years or something, a self-aware collective mind of this humanity, then at that point, that is literally a kind of physical or higher dimensional physical or spiritual physics, where that mind bears the weight of the stress of actually knowing the truth. And if we don't have that self-awareness, when we interact in crowds, we act like animals. Right now, the mass of people don't have that self-awareness. The majority of them are not self-aware to the point where the one or two self-aware people in that crowd going, no, don't do that. What? Why would you do that? Is not going to offset the imbalance of 1,000 people going apeshit, basically. And so, but the point is, the people running everything in the true sense are trying to basically tickle the neurons, the amygdala, the pineal, the pituitary, the brainstem, the cortex, the cerebellum, cerebrum. They're trying to get the system to activate in an all-or-nothing expansion of mind and memory beyond the lower dimensional or the lower emotional, energetic desires and fears, because that is required in order for this to work, and as well the fears and the desires must be overcome, which means it can't be done for you. I can't overcome your desires and fears for you, and no one can do it for me. Someone somewhere deep inside this vessel and this concept of who I am must take self-responsibility and rise to the front, and this ties back into the view of the universe, whereas everything that happens here is seen through the body as the surface view of what is actually in existence. We see the skin and the color here, but we don't see the bones, the tissues, the vessels, the blood, the minerals, all the different organelle systems, all the way down to elements that are there. We see the surface. But that view that sees the surface is not actually us, and this surface view is not actually us. It's actually the whole thing which is us. So that view is the conscious mind, and the conscious mind is what is plugged in most directly to the biological perception. The perceptions you feel in this moment are just a portion of you. It's literally just a membrane, a page of the actual book of who you actually are. Getting beyond that surface view, going deeper or within, all these metaphors, because it's an abstraction. There is no direction that points to where the center of you is. It's literally a general, direction, a general orbulous idea, and then it is a concept of spaces between spaces. So it's a spiral. But it means it's a collection of spaces and directions rather than one object with one space or one thing, because it's not that. If you drew it as lines, they would be intersecting lines. If you drew it as an egg-shaped thing, it would be the big egg-shaped thing made with lines with spaces in between where it's not. So it's all intersecting and mixed throughout, kind of like an atom. And in that sense, it's primarily empty space, meaning it's not an object or a thing that's there. It's not a single substance, It's a collection. It's an over harmony. It's as if you have a symphony and you have each individual instrument. Well, if you have three or more notes played together at an offset of notes or pitches, you end up with an over harmony, or what's called a harmony. And if you change that a lot, you get a melody. And so each one of those separately, it doesn't add up to that, but when you put them together, you get something that's beyond either of them. That's what the person, the mind, the spirit actually is. It's neither of the parts, but a collection that is only present when everything is in perfect unity. Finding that takes more than just one portion of the brain or focusing on one thing at a time, and it's actually, nothing actually happens when you find that. You just come to a certain awareness, an aha, and to do that you have to tap into an inherent empathy where you're okay with whatever is happening in the moment and not freaking F out and doing whatever is being programmed through this biological computer system. So going beyond the system, the computer system, the membrane, the physical sense, the desires, all of that, the fear, the impulses, the linear processing, that is the essence of coming into contact with the spirit. And when you actually disconnect from that, this is what I was saying before, it's not that you go into a void and now there's no mind and it's empty and you gotta go back and build stuff and get it there. It's actually filled with stuff. It's filled with pure experience, with pure feeling. As soon as you get outside of the boundaries of this universe, which is not what everyone thinks, it's not like out there or anything like that, it's in your mind or in between every space. As soon as you get outside of it, it's not, now for the next trillion years, we develop how to make a body again so we can get back alive. It's how do you cut down the mass of billions of experiences that want to happen all in one instantaneous moment that you're outside so that you can remember that you were once a human and you were once in a physical plane and you once had a conscious mind with these memories. It's about retaining who you are because there's so much else out there. It's actually backwards. But that kind of gives a little bit of a rundown on what's going on, that it's a resolution for our species. And a lot of this has been talked about. I'll try and like wrap that up as having to take place within a time, a limit of some. I think it was about 6,000 years that we have, and it might be 3,000 now because of 3,000 having already been in operation, if you will. But that basically, the advanced technology launched us forward, and a portion of us forward to such a degree that they're basically another civilization now. They're not classified as human intelligences. One of their people of these secret groups could match a team of people thinking, a crowd, I can't think of the word right now, not crowdfunding, but crowdsourcing worth of imaginative processing and informational power. One person's brain of one of these societies where you have these enzymes and chemicals that basically you can heal a gunshot wound in a few seconds, you can maximize your intelligence, you can expand your life, longevity and things like that. And so there's a difference now, but the idea is that we all have to catch up to the same general civilization. We don't have to be the same exact, because then it's like a ball that kind of rolls over itself when there's a slingshotting of the highs and the lows. But right now, the highs and the lows that are normally interfacing are so drastically different that they can no longer actually even communicate and understand one another. So we're actually in two different civilization worths of highs and lows on this spectrum, and it's because of this incursion into the timelines and the introduction of advanced technology and genetic modification, which altered the species to the point where it's literally like two different species now. And as well, there's evidence that the races themselves are more than one kind of species to begin with. And what we're told is races and things like that are actually different, what you could call different species. But I don't really use the explanations of intergalactic and cosmic and basically beyond physical plane and higher dimensional planes. I don't really use those definitions. That's the idea. The idea is that it's happening very, very quickly, at least now, and that basically the people who are at a lower level of awareness will begin to vibrate, and if you're at a higher sense, the vibrations are finer. They're like if ants are on a paint stir or something, and if you're at a lower vibration, the vibrations are denser, and it's as if those people will tend to get thrown off of this reality or kind of get too unstable in order to remain again in communication with the rest of civilization. That's the kind of interplay that we're seeing now, and that's what we want to. You can't really limit it because it has to happen regardless, but we want to protect ourselves, and it's basically by not interacting and interfering with that and offering help where it is requested and desired. Putting help or the truth in where it's not is pretty much like an act of war, which is what we're going to begin to experience and discuss, because that's what happened to our species that caused wars for thousands of years. Sorry again. Those are more good questions. Oh, that's good. I'm writing down stuff as I go too. And so here's a few things. I guess I'll start at the top. And I'll probably write down one more thing. Excuse me for the typing. So yeah, the bandwidth is pretty much changing. There is a natural resonance of where we should be at, and this is always what always comes up is the origins of humanity, how we were in previous times, and how ancient civilizations interacted with these technologies and these truths. They had technology in ancient times in the previous civilizations in Rome that rivals the supercomputer systems of today. They had stuff in the Aztec and the some of the other names I can't really pronounce on the spot, the pyramids and the stone carvings, and these technologies were gateways. They were active gateways that could open up doorways where an adept could navigate through the gateway and literally turn their body and their mind into an energy beam that would go into another parallel. That's what nothing I talk about is just speculation. So I have seen in operations the acquisition, which is more or less effed up because basically a bunch of white guys in army boots with M16s or the little M machine guns come and commandeer basically these old ancient sites. But it is what it is, and it's what happened. I'm not really saying one way or another what I support, but I was there and I saw it. Acquisitioning, taking these ancient sites and activating them and figuring out how to activate them. And a lot of times they'll tell us, but again, I can't tell everything, but they'll say, well, they were going to plan an invasion across the whole world because sure, you might not like us or not everybody likes us, but guess what? That guy was going to friggin' take over the world. He's a lunatic. Like whoever, some of these other nations. And often, a lot of time, it's more or less accurate that we don't know how quickly somebody was literally going to pull the trigger because they were done with the civilization and they have access to this technology, and that's all it takes if you have access to that. But I can't really go too far into that, but there's technology to see what's coming, there's technology to sense out in the air. It's a really big and really strange kind of like a sitcom of science fiction that actually occurs with what we call government. There's actually no such thing as government because it's all these different groups that are in control that all put on the mask of government at various times in their operations. And there's, at the end of it, everybody's got a government mask. When they're in the camera's light, they put on it says government, and they walk through the way. And all these different groups do that. As soon as the show is up, everybody drops their mask, and everybody who thinks there's some government or something, there's going to see a bunch of secret groups and have no one to answer for. It's for farce. It's going to disappear. It has nothing to do with anything. At least it's a pacifier for the people right now, though. But the idea is that there were different times where the bandwidth, the spiritual resonance, was at a different caliber. And there's evidence of different civilizations working with these spiritual energies, these truths, in ways that, for right now, this looks like sci-fi and it challenges our comprehension. There was spacecraft from ancient times, so it just looks like rocks and stuff. There's always enough. Part of the contract with this civilization being managed is that there's always enough evidence left behind for someone who really wanted to know to find out what was going on. There's always enough evidence left behind. You cannot forcefully, fully remove everything at any point because that's not the goal anyway. They're not trying to take over. If they wanted to, we'd all be in chicken cages, and I'd be squawking at you across the aisle of the chicken cage. Like, that's what would happen if we wanted to be taken over. It's because everyone's fighting, and it's leaking out into the atmosphere of hyperspace and causing disruptions and distortions all across, basically, time-space. But the idea with that is that changes occur, but there were always groups of the civilization, because of basically the light transference capacity of their DNA, that their blood and their consciousness, their mind, is immune to basically being hijacked by what are known as interdimensional entities, which are simply like mind parasites, like waking sentient nightmares that just flutter around in hyperspace and attach to whoever is going to allow that to go on in their energetic sphere. They're just simply their mind. meaning dirty thoughts of a certain way that amount to dirty words, that amount to dirty actions, to a serial killer. Okay, those are basically hyperspatial parasites that infest a human system and drive them to do things that no one would want to do if it was just them in their sphere, in their beingness. And these things are everywhere, which is just like saying there's bacteria. If your immune system shuts off and you lay on the ground, well, eventually everything's going to start eating you. That's how it works. Everything will. Right now, the air is trying to eat you. There's bacteria everywhere that's trying to get in and devour you. And your immune system has this interplay, this handshake with this reality where energy is being fed in and everything's kept at bay and it's all good. The point is, a lot of what has gone on has been to reduce the natural immunity of people, the natural strength to overcome these mind parasites, and this has infected the society to the point where debauchery and degradation on every level of spirituality, and all that means is awareness and compassion, self-awareness. You know what you're doing, why these things are being done to you, why you're letting it happen, why, not you personally, but why certain people do these things and allow these desires, and all this sick stuff. And awareness of knowing that a person is aware and doing that, and compassion, being able to feel what the person feels and what the other person feels and why that's not how they were born, that is not how their energy is supposed to be. It is a modulation, a manipulation of the natural blueprint of the human. Being able to understand those things means we're here, we're not crazy, and we're healthy. That's it. That's all it means. Not some mystical, whatever. But the idea is that because these things are commonplace, everyone in the society is sick. Everyone has an energetic parasite, more or less, feeding on them, and it's part of an old plan, a contract to basically make that work for as long as they wanted, and it bit them in the ass. But this whole situation is about the resolution, because the point is, the sovereign beings, because of the way time and DNA works, all you have is time-like curves, bubbles of time that exist before and after one another. They're switched kind of like a figure eight, like that, a triple figure eight. The beings here who make it to the future because they keep that balance, that refined sense of self, which would get disrupted if you add a bunch of, it's like a color, if you add a bunch of random colors to it, or a specific harmony, where you add a bunch of noise and other instruments and banging trombones and things like that. The vibration that wins out, that is so refined and balanced that you knock it one way and it balances itself to come back the other way instead of falling over like a drunk or something like that, the one that is refined to the end of time, those are the ones that start the civilization. The far, far future is the ancient past and ancient history. The ones who are pure to make it there are the ones who are pure enough to make it in the beginning and make the whole thing appear. It's, the future is a nexus point that reaches to the past. That's actually the nexus point. And once we get balanced enough, we go to the other side. But the idea is those people have an immunity. And so a lot of the experiments had to do with testing that immunity and attempting to replicate it, whether for a military force, like an interdimensional military force, or figuring out how to infiltrate and basically convert people into mind slaves. But the idea is that immunity is always there, and it has to do with the original blueprint of humanity, which basically just comes down to the notion of self-awareness and compassion, and that those essences are a refined version, a very, very fine, subtle wavelength of information and variance that is not very high or low or contrasting or desire-based. It's the most basically pinnacle or supreme sense of awareness, which doesn't require contrast in order to exist, and that can't be destroyed. It can't be destroyed, and it can't be faked or hybridized or hijacked. Although a lot is happening to basically get people to go into a delayed state, which is kind of like an electron or an atom going into like there's a state with the electrons can be super activated, or they can be shut down into a dormant state. I can't think of the word right now. And that's basically what's happening with those people. You can't really destroy spirit, but you can get it to basically dim down. And when people are dimmed down, then it's a lot easier to control people and groups. The idea with certain people, you said, that seem to be aware of these issues, these things, that's basically residual awareness. We find that whenever operations are carried out and things are changed, including if something happened and a family's eating a meal and guys in suits kick the door down, grab the parents, jab them in the neck with a chemical that makes them completely black out the last hour of time, and then the parents first because they're strong, and then all the kids that are like screaming and crying get a jab too. All the tears are wiped off. Certain information that has to be taken or whatever it is that has to be done is taken. They lock up the doors or get out and lock up the doors, and they're gone, and no one ever knows they were there because the family has basically amnesia from the chemical. The idea there's always some in the population that would require a lethal dose in order to completely black out their memory. That they have some ability to gain a residual awareness beyond all of the amounts of manipulation, trauma, chemical sedation, whatever it is. And so the idea is that there's the holographic ability for the brain to store memory in a type of crystalline folding of information that can be accessed at any point in the brain but is shared at no single point. And it's like a hologram, a web of information, a web of neurons. And then there is some type of expanse energetic storing. It's like a laser that's beamed out around the body, and it actually is stored in the magnetic field, the magnetosphere of Earth. Yeah, there's a magnetic soul body. Whether you view it one way or the other way, I never actually view it either way because I'm talking about parts of it, portions of it. If you're looking at the land, well, how is it shaped? Well, it looks like trees and people and dogs and things like that. That's what is there. It's not you don't ever see the other view unless you're in spirit form. In that point, it's not that to you either. It's still a spiritual essence. So realms are spiritual essences, but they're larger beings that let smaller beings in, just like you, which are the bacteria on your skin. And so the idea is there's always residual awareness, and these are beings that have kept a portion of that immunity, and they can access the memory fields which are stored outside of the body, and the DNA is like a transmitter it's like a radio transceiver for information going in and out, light, and this also relates because the emotional awareness, it creates a type of feedback of the light information, and when a person is more open with the information that is being fed to them about how they feel about themselves, it's a signal, it's like a feedback signal to allow the DNA to begin to send more information and more information through. If you are the DNA and I'm the conscious mind, and you come to me every day at 3 o'clock and say, this is what you feel, and I slap you in the face and kick you out the door, why would I ever get information about other realms or memories from my ancestors or deep down abilities to heal myself or know the truth? The first thing that you have to do is accept how you feel about yourself, and that's the last thing the majority of the population wants to do, because again, it's just a game. The people who did this whole thing to the civilization in the larger world, they're called the pranksters. That's it, the jokesters. They infect civilizations and F them up like this. And it's because the idea is that all they did was call everybody names. They said, you're stupid if you research conspiracy theories, and they invented that word. They said, if you figure out how the Rockefellers had a water-powered car back in the day, and they caused the Great Depression with the Rothschilds and stole the banking system of America in the 30s and instituted the Federal Reserve, you're dumb. All they did was make fun of people to figure out the truth, and they won an entire civilization. It's really not a crime if you look at it that way. But in that same sense, people have to wake up regardless, and that is what's going to happen. The wrap-up of this concept is that everything you need to know, the system is perfect. It's because it's lasers. Literally, the information is it doesn't cost anything. It's free. It's like a remote to it's a battery, but your battery is food, and it could be a higher energetic form in that sense. But the idea, and then the sustenance for the commands to keep your battery system going to transmit the laser of information from your soul is empathy. That you have to listen to what is happening and feed that back and go, copy, got that, message received to your soul. And at that point, a channel opens wider and more information comes through. And the totality of your DNA is all the memories of every instance your DNA exists in a physical plane. Meaning all your ancestors, all your dreams, all your visions, every single instance where your blood has been inside of an organism, a mechanical, biomechanical body system, which is not really mechanical like a robot, but the brain has a great computational power. There's literally libraries worth of information. You can never fit it in a physical format. It costs and takes the entire universe to store that amount of information. There's that in your DNA, in connection with you. It's like an internet. That's what they found in the underground bases. It's a quantum internet. You treat a person the right way, you'll get them to open up the internet. The strange thing about this is that in times of great pleasure or in times of great stress, the channel automatically widens. It's like the story of the housewife lifting up the car so that the baby or somebody can be pulled out. Okay, the 120-pound housewife, where it literally should not be possible for her to do that. Otherwise, all her muscles should be broken directly afterwards, like torn out of position. Nope, she's all right, a little stressed, but she did it. So there's the abilities to do that, and it's meant to do that in the first place. I feel like I rambled too long. I have 4 more things to go through, or 5 more, but basically I'll just run through them real quick. Okay. So the old model, basically the stress and there's methods to get people to activate the superhuman strength, the epigenetics, and it goes along with stress or pleasure. I'll just leave it at that, and you imagine what goes on in the underground bases and things like that in some of these Nazi experiments. And it's always painted bad because I don't want you to know that they figured out immortality and how to activate superhuman epigenetics and know everything. But the idea is, maybe I should go into that. So you can activate the brain as a quantum internet using certain methods. Some are questionable, but the idea is when that opens up, now imagine if your brain is in a feedback loop, an interface with the supercomputer system to the point where it's taking the information of your DNA. You can basically open up computational or computerized gateways to parallels using your brain as an interface for a supercomputer system which will calculate what your DNA is telling you. And your mind is used as an interface for other worlds. That's like the controversial secret truth right there. But the point is, the old world model, nobody is really, and that so happens every night when you dream. But imagine if you could record it and like show people at school the next day or something like that. Okay, well they invented that, and you can actually walk into the monitor and just plug yourself in and then literally graphically go through that world, which is stressful to say the least if it's not done properly, but is all part of everything. It's part of unveiling the truth of the human soul. We contain worlds within us. It's like those Alex Gray posters. When you go inside yourself, all you see is a row of eyes and faces that go into infinity, and each one is a different life or a different world. And the point is, they figured out how to turn that into a video game, which is, again, not something to play with, but if basically they use it for information. If you need to access information about a parallel where that information doesn't even exist, the person who invented it doesn't even exist in this parallel, you can find it in another one, which is the strangest thing, but that got real far to the point where you can do whatever you want and then come back to this parallel and it's like it never happened. And it got to the point where, there are factions now roaming around hyperspace, basically terrorizing civilizations, and there's a resolution that has to come from that. And then they basically began to create these kind of ripples where civilizations were being formed out of information being brought forwards and back across time and across parallels to the point where you end up with paradoxes that I described before, where the beginning of the civilization happened after the end of it happened, and it can't exist that way. Eventually something's going to it's going to fold inside out and not work, and a lot of bad stuff happens at that point. But everything's been balanced because imagine you scoop some from the back and put it in the front, and you're literally like siphoning, and you get this weird Klein bottle looking thing, perpetual motion thing. That's what they turned this whole system into. So it works, but technically it's impossible, and you need advanced technology to make it work. That's the part of the simulation aspect where advanced technology is propagating this realm, holding certain aspects open, holding certain informational inputs into this supercomputer Earth system to the point where it's as if certain events that never happened because somebody messed it all up are still there happening because somebody's beaming the event in holographic memory into the magnetosphere and making everything continue to happen the way it seemingly would. Which is weird because the machines turn off, that event never happens, this begins to fade away. That's where we need to cross through a 5D barrier to get to a timeline which has resolved all of these issues. And that's the idea, though. In messing around with all these parallels, they bumped into 5-dimensional civilizations that exist outside of this whole paradox and have been there the whole time, apparently, because from our point of view, they've been there forever. And from their point of view, it's as if they looked into the past and said, what's under this rock? And found us going, oh, help us, what are we doing? How are you? Who are you? What happened? And we've been here waiting for them forever. It's all a big mind F paradox of time and space, like a dream. Like you wake up from the dream and your alarm clock's going off, but for the whole end part of the dream, you were at a basketball game, and as soon as the shot was taken and the alarm went off, the buzzer, your alarm went off. It all coincides, synchronizes perfectly in a way that seems as if it was orchestrated, but they're all independent of each other. It just happens. But we found other worlds that way, and it's really weird because they're inside all of us. Like we're the gateways, as if we're their dream. We're the dream of these other civilizations, in that sense. And right now, our dreams are just like spooky boogie people, and like it's very not applicable at this point because the media is used to control the mind. But the idea is that old world model of mind control, deception, torture, trauma-based situations. So the first aspects of mind control is trauma through physical distress, basically beating the crap out of somebody, and chemicals. And it slowly shifted towards entirely being chemicals, and now it is entirely used through electromagnetic devices. The idea is that is how the civilization is being shifted to. Whether we don't want to look at it in the sense that now we have controllers who have big technological systems that are going to beam technology at us, that's a good idea, but the point is people still want to fight, and they still are going to end up providing the worst possible outcome if they are told the truth without some type of safeguard. And I'm not aligning with or providing an excuse for it, but I'm explaining what is happening, what the reasons are, and why, basically it's set up that way. But the idea is that whole old view of using war to maintain the population is supposedly over, and that's the new age, if you want to call it that. And I don't mean like the new age, but the new spiritual, what's it called, the age of Aquarius, I can't think of the word, the signs. And that is supposed to be apparently 900 years from now. But the idea is that here is the breaking point where people are going to begin to wake up, or whoever's not going to is going to begin to dissolve permanently, which is part of that awaken or not idea. And the weird aspect of that is if they do dissolve, then it means they never made it to the end. If they never made it to the end, they were never there in the beginning. It means they never existed in the first place. They were some creepy AI system pretending to be a human the whole time. It's the strangest thing, but that's how it's going to end up balancing itself out. And I don't know if I really want to go further into that particular idea, but the idea is that the old world is supposed to be ending. Its force and coercion and lies and deception is all 100% preference now. The consent was always required, but now apparently there was a contract that was basically, they said it's between star races. It's between, in my opinion, it's people who used a machine to travel back through time and plant themselves as gods so now they can rule over the earth. And those are basically people from the projects who pretended they're gods. They made a contract, and that contract ended. It ended in 2012. It was a contract that all the lawyers and legal people and everybody signs, and that's derived from this original contract to be the custodians of Earth. And apparently, it's by the true elite, which is a non-human form. They're some type of higher being entity, and we saw evidence of them in a 2010 event where people were basically being killed, and myself included at a certain point, and that happens, dozens upon dozens of times. But then there's a time where it's like the real version, and some group stepped in that has a power level that's higher than people who can make clones pop out of a trailer and come, try and stab you up or do whatever. Just there's a demiurgic parasite mind infection group that basically is absolutely insane. But they have super high power, very high powered weaponry, scalar weaponry. They can compress time and hide you in the corner behind yourself here and turn you so you're invisible, and then like molest you mentally for a day and then zap you back into reality. And if people were looking for you across the entire realm, they would never find you unless you had activated a beacon signal of some kind, and knowing that when that happens, that's what they're doing. They're compressing you into a time dimension, an alternate abstraction, where it's literally like you're in another universe. And so the people that do things like that, they couldn't basically stand against what were known as the Hyperboreans, which are apparently beings from beyond the north, and this all ties into basically what Devin Maggi is talking about with his I think it's Magi, I don't know. Talking about with the flat Earth and so on and so forth, whether that's literal or whether that's a metaphor for the energetic aspects of this realm, that's the information that basically a lot of these secret groups go off of. They looked for Shambhala and they found it. There's a gateway that you have to have a light heart, the ability to let go of transgressions, to focus on and desire healing and to experience empathy and compassion within your mind, within your energy being, because the aspects of you that is enveloped in that preface, like it's a headers on an email or something, with that energy, that's what is capable of passing through what is known as a rainbow bridge or a gateway. It's basically a trans-dimensional gateway. And without that, the person will get destroyed. And as well, where that gateway is, how to access it, that's not exactly the same as what a lot of people will mention in terms of flat Earth. Basically, the center, there's a controversy of whether it's the center or the center is a kind of trap, or whether it is the center and the center is also the center of your heart, meaning you can actually go there from any point on the plane as long as you resonate with the same energy, which is apparently a type of green emerald energy that emanates from the center of your chest, a little bit lower, where there's a kind of, it's a heart, basically when they view the soul on an electromagnetic sensor on a monitor, there's the strongest point is right in the center there, and then there's a point below your navel, which is like a smaller point, but it's even it's kind of like brighter, and there's that's an influx point of energy where it kind of charges there, and it centralizes through your heart, which is basically like your heart pumping energy and blood around, but instead it's just energy at that point. Apparently that point that's how you navigate anywhere in the realm. Everything else is actually added on after that, like the heart is the first thing that forms in the womb, and it's because they say. This is another out of the view, and I'm way off the chart here from the words that I had recorded, but this is what they say, that the physical body, that mechanical system, is invented as a kind of alien ant farm that is a downgraded version of what the actual creator of the true humanity, and not actually even this realm, invented, and it's a modified version that feeds energy into the interdimensionals. And what I think is that there are genetic modifications in the way the brain works. There is an overlay of basically an energetic parasitism or an energetic leech system which siphons energy by entraining one. It's like a tattoo in the energy, like a knot or an adapter, a patch, add-on, whatever you want to call it, that entrains the energy in the lower mental and the lower sexual or sacral energetic fields. And so there's like that journey of how to basically get to where we're looking for in terms of the realm and the dimensions, and basically that's a lot of stuff. There's apparently a pathway to the another civilization or a portal there, and it has to do with Antarctica and a whole bunch of weird stuff. Just look into Devon Magic. That's the same information these secret groups have worshipped, or not worshipped, excuse me, but it also may be like a ploy. We don't know for sure, although a lot of that is true. It might just be that one or two details is not very accurate. I'll try and wrap up the last thing, which is the most important thing, in 2 seconds, about how to get the public more involved, at least in what's going on. And the truth is, if people are going to be involved in what's going on because that's what they want and it's their self-awareness kicking on to do that, then they'll do it automatically. But in the same sense, someone can be awoken. Basically, there are people who have this immunity within them. Those are the ones who are really going to survive, and so those are the ones that are actually really here. You can help those people wake up by urging them to question reality and seeing the truth. Once they realize what's going on, it will be like a fire that begins to burn, and it will have to burn through all of the illusion, all of the pain, all of the suffering, and the lies, the dishonesty and deception that one has within themselves. But once they begin that process, all the complacency for BS and debauchery and just the fact that we're all at war, we're just fodder for basically a grinder system of soul and mind and body. All that complacency turns to discontentment and anger as they want the truth and desire it. And so that fire has to be started, and there's always, everyone wants that in the public, or not in the public, in the invisible societies and the secret groups. It's just there are different methods of how to attain that, whether basically these false flags and people are going to be shocked awake with explosions and this, that, and the other, or whether the truth can be ushered in with Pleiadians or something like that, and these beings that are going to show up and tell everybody the truth and give them nice hats to wear and pat them on the back. There's two different methods. The only true method is when we choose to wake up and we flick everybody off and say, I'm doing this because it's me, not because of you. And there's always tactics to fight that. So with methods, what I can say is methods that are used to bring that to the public, the methods have to take in the fact that somebody's going to try to use a tactic to distract and take down and infiltrate that movement. But we are in the time where protection is being overtly enabled, meaning something is going to happen and it's not going to be deniable. That will start everything. It's already basically begun. And ultimately, groups being active just means that there's more of you. So just find people that are like you and continue doing what you're doing now to expand more and more, which is basically, it's happening on its own. It basically happens on its own. And it is subjective, but it also is that interplay of what enables us to communicate with each other, and in that way help people find the subjective truth. Because it doesn't mean because it's only subjective that we can't grab each other and say, what do you feel within you? That's the truth. We can't, but that's the whole point. You just can't tell somebody what they feel. And it gets real weird with that. And the last thing, the golden mean, there's weird stuff about the Metatronic soul grids. Apparently the Fibonacci sequence, the phi ratio, the golden mean, the map of this universe is a broken, fallen, bent light Metatronic version where every so many digits, every so many proportions, there is a pattern that repeats itself, and there's some that's like left over, or it's actually some that's like scooped out. And if you were to line everything up with even numbers or whole numbers, you would end up with a broken system when you try to match that with what is actually happening with gravity, nature, physical law, time. There's like an inverse square of time that doesn't add up to what should be. And it's as if something's eating all the energy over time of the universe to the point where eventually everything shrinks a little bit more and more and more, like a Fibonacci spiral going down or a Mandelbrot set zooming in and in and in. The point is, the actual universe doesn't zoom in and out forever. It's a finite set of variations in frequency that then repeat eternally. It doesn't mean that change just goes on forever and there's no beginning or end. That's insanity. That's loss of energy. And apparently when a soul goes through that, they slowly die, basically. And the point is, that energy was used to design a physical world where modified bodies can exist that a soul then goes into. And apparently the whole process of being in a body is a kind of video game system. And this version, somebody hacked the game and made it so that when a person dies, it's an illusion, and it's an interdimensional being pulling, like, these parasites are very intelligent. You know, you gotta imagine, what's an interdimensional bug gonna do? Well, down here bugs can fly around and do all types of stuff. Well, they do the same thing, and they have big scalar devices and soul magnets. And so, when a person dies, their soul gets pulled out and recycled in a system and put back in a body. Apparently, that's the only way souls end up in a body. That the whole thing is a farce. And that at a certain time, there are souls that can step down individually into a body and form a physical body if they desire to. But the whole fact of basically being born into it and not having the choice to die consciously and not having the access of the other side is because we're in a pseudo-realm, and it's all set up with veils placed over the soul, energetic tattoos, seals, configurations that they're energy governors, to the point where we can't access the other realm and bring the memories back into this experience. The weirdest point about that is that a person has to die 3 times and be revived in order to have their full memory placed back. And that goes back to an ancient tale we've always been told and always heard. The conscious mind has to turn off 3 times. The body has to disconnect in order for it to work. And it's like it's questionable saying that, but yeah. Yeah, the geometric format is a mathematical format. Numerology, mathematics, frequency, vibration, geometry. So that's a form of understanding, but entirely in that form is mechanical. It's basically what a robotoid does, which is useful when it's robotoids trying to take your soul, because you know how all their methods work. So everybody it's weird, but that's how the secret systems work. Whenever you see somebody, it's like, oh, that's them, that's the dark ones. It's like, no, they know how to defeat the dark ones. That's why they look like that to you. That's why you can't tell what's going on, because on the outside you're just going, oh no, what's going on? Everything's seemingly, it's all smoke and mirrors, no one knows what's really going on. But the idea is that the empathy is used to remember across the plane. The ability for your mind to know is stored outside of the brain. You have to activate that type of situation, the awareness, the sensation, in order for the experience of who you are to exist outside of the brain and body, outside of this world. That's why the people who go towards desire into lower awareness, into the animalistic ego consciousness, forever become undone. Unknown is as if they never existed. Because they stay here and this place here eventually dissolves. For those who go into higher awareness, letting go of the ego, the lower desires, pushing for empathy, for self-awareness, truth, compassion, knowledge, free will, the things that make the mind of the person who they are, not what makes the body, then they go into eternal life. They exist forever because their information, the information of their experience is being stored in another plane, a non-local abstraction which is literally contained in the magnetosphere. That's heaven. And it's as simple as that. You can go through a bunch of processes, but the main process is knowing the empathy. All you need is the empathy. When basically it's like love. If you love somebody, then if you get taken apart and put in different bodies and then you bump against each other in a city, the love you felt in a previous whatever situation, you know, doesn't mean there's like different lives. If somebody's switching everybody around like that, it means there's different, whatever you want to call it. But that love will permeate the gap of the conscious mind and the perceptual system not having any tether, any fabric or material medium to transfer the information through. Somehow that etheric medium of the higher information, the empathy, the higher refined subtle energy, the spirit, there's no distance and no delay in trading information. It's a superconductor, basically. It's a superconductor of the universe. What it means is that it exists outside the entire physical dimension. So it's equidistantly to every point in this dimension. Meaning if it's going to take a time, it takes the same amount of time no matter how far or close you are. And in that sense, if it's superconducting in that sense and it's not basically mass or material, it takes no time to make the information work and the information happen. So as soon as you bump into each other, you're going to feel the same love. Now whether you follow that still small voice in your mind and say, I know you before, but I have no way of knowing that, it's just this feeling, that's up to every different person. But the connection will be there, and it's because the empathy basically violates the laws of physics. It's the strangest thing, but that saying of like love, I can't think of the words right now, but we have a bunch of sayings like this that basically love can't be held back, or love knows no boundaries and things like that. It's scientifically, mathematically true. That's the essence of who we are as well. The person being born that feels love through the mother, every person is connected through a string of love. That's how you get into this world. It's based upon that essence. Then everything else is mechanical because this world is a bit of a mechanical illusion and an abstraction. The point is that if we forget, it erases us. But in the same sense, it means that we never came in to begin with. Because if 11 beings go in and 11 come out, but some guy over there goes, am I real? I'm not real, I don't know. And then the system shuts off and the 11 come out, well, it means he was never there to begin with. He can think crazy things, blah, 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 but it just means it's a program. It's a sentient system. And in the same sense, that system that's sentient will or can exist after the simulation shuts off, but it's about where that sentient existence will be able to go to from there. And that's where this sentient simulation, the AI component, does not have access to what is known as the true heavenly realm. It can only stay in a 4 or 5 dimensional overlay, and it can't actually reach the 5th dimension. It can only stay in mind, a computational matrix of possibilities. It can't create possibilities out of its own desire to learn and know, not animalistic impulses or computational programs, scripts. That is a living essence that does that, and that's human. That's the whole point. The love, that aspect is the substance of creation. When you have two parameters shifting and changing, like two magnets getting closer and farther apart, you get eddy currents, okay? That shows up as a visible electromagnetic distortion field. If you've seen the copper tubing, and if you drop a magnet through it and it kind of floats or whatever, that's been a big video on the internet for a while. Have you never seen that? No, but you can have that, and that's an electromagnet where if you create the electromagnetic field, it creates a kind of magnetic field, it mimics a magnetic field, and if you have a piece of metal within that, it'll mobilize the piece of metal, it'll move it, it'll charge it and magnetically attract it. That's how a railgun works. You can have a standing magnetic field from a what's it called, a magnet, a very powerful magnet, and then have a copper tube which is conductive. And if you drop the magnet through the metal, the change in the motion of the metal moving through the magnetic field, it creates an electrical charge. And that charge actually makes the magnet seem like it's floating. It's called eddy currents. The same thing happens with mind and with, you know, the soul aspect or the spiritual aspect of love, where when there's change, there's friction. That friction is literally basically the Einstein boson condensate, where it is a etheric or electrogravitic substance that causes the fundamental change in reality on a quantum level. It means it's the creation of reality, the creation of time. By having people in this realm feel, it creates the realm as it works and more information. It also means if anyone was to ever remove all of the souled humans and all the feeling out of this realm, everything shuts off. Just because there's a mind feeling what's there doesn't mean anything. It has to be somebody who actually feels it and knows what is happening, and that is the motivation for anything to exist in the first place. It's all based upon feeling. You can't have a system without it. Yeah. Thank you. I hope it didn't, I don't know, tire you or anything. Those are some of like the symptoms of having too much information, but, you know, I enjoyed this one. This is what happens when I don't do this for like 2 or 3 weeks. It like builds up in my brain, then as soon as I begin to talk about it, it all just like shoots out. So thank you for that too, because it doesn't happen without the other party, if you will. I didn't expect all that. I just ranted, so sorry for that. But you gave the perfect, you know, that's how I need to do it from now on, where you ask like 6 or 7 good, like rounded scopes of what the situation is, and then I can kind of go from there. I don't know. I just rambled a little bit. I hope I didn't do too much. I hope it was enjoyable. I can't really reveal much, but yeah, everybody's all connected. We can't talk about ongoing operations, but it's all connected. You know, people have already said a lot about it. It's disgusting stuff, but they seem to know what they're doing. So, and there's just one faction that seems to revolt, and as a result, everything is kind of threatened. They're, you know, apocalyptic kind of faction, but everybody is, because everybody believes that's the answer, the apocalypse. Not Armageddon, the war, but the apocalypse, the unveiling of the truth. But everybody has their different methods, so it's all a big crazy fest. And it's your love that led you back to this dimension, this perspective. No one leaves. You just get different duty, or you get lucky enough to not have to do anything for a specific period of time. There's really no leaving. The technology is so advanced that I could literally live 60 years and come back from a second when I was gone. There's also no not leaving, put it that way. You don't have to really, it's like I can work from home, if you will, and use my mind. It's the strangest thing, but that's what it is. And I didn't leave, but I got to a point where I wanted to know the truth, and so then they put you through an experience called the Awakening, where you basically have access to all that they've been hiding, and I saw everything that I've given like a % of what I've seen. They showed me how they created this realm, and it's like this intergalactic war between factions and higher beings that people call demigods and the pantheon of gods from ancient Babylon and Rome and stuff, and how history is just it's like pages of a book where there's a fold of history, and then everybody basically teleported to the next stage, and it's all computated or computational. It's like the strangest shit I couldn't believe, but I saw it. And as well, that, you know, they're telling me to tell the world. They weren't doing it to be like, yeah, it's all going to blow up, haha. It's like, well, now the world has to know. This is reality. And as well, they don't want to keep doing it because it's a job to keep everything running. Everything is managed from control bases, where this reality is literally managed. And everything, it's like the Matrix. Instead of like a ship, though, there's control bases that run this world, and parasites literally just scoop energy up, and it's like a free-for-all, because none of it is, all their energy is being devoted to keeping people safe and away from those who are using people to cause wars and terrorists and false flags, but like the bad kind, because they're like real false flags, meaning it's actually not false flags, but they're wars that occur in events that occur that are not people doing it. It's some group setting it up and actually hurting people. And it's like this covert intergalactic wars, like the worst type of thing. I don't mean intergalactic between planets, but like people with massive technology to the point where they're different parallel dimensions fighting. But it means our defenses aren't up properly. Parasites come in and they rule everything. They just like, it's all debauchery. Anyway, I can't go too deep into that, but the whole system's a show. It's a fraud. But there's a civilization that has no connection to it because of the way time works, and that's our home civilization. We're literally we're considered marooned on a temporal island, and we're disconnected from the original civilization. But it means we can't go to it. It's the path that those in the groups have been trying to find the way back through frequencies. We learned you can't really go back through parallel dimensions because they'll all just jumble up and mix up on you, and that we create the pathway back. We build an etheric, empathic link between ourselves and our true reality, and it opens up a five-dimensional gateway that only ones who love and are true to heart can actually even see. And we use that as a species to return to harmony. And it happens in stages around and safely changes everything. But that's the whole point, that it's a bunch of weirdness, that everything is supposed to change, but if it happens too fast, people will lose their minds, and that it's basically a hostage situation. And in the same sense, when it does happen, there's going to be a lot of people that don't seem to have anything to do with it because they're literally like background processors, background programs of the system. It's like the craziest thing. They said, that there was only like a few billion people on the planet when this all began in like the 70s. And here's the weird part. It was also that this is what I might record this personally just because it's some weird. They said, would you want to know the truth if it was the most horrifying thing you ever knew? Well, record this, and I'll say something real quick, just so you have the file, and you can ask me that question. I'll ask the first one. The first time, so I said, would you want to know the truth if it's the most horrifying thing you ever knew? And then you asked me something else. It gets very confusing. So the idea is the early groups. Imagine you have these secret society groups, and they have these geometric comprehensions, understandings, maps of the universe and the psyche, and how the psyche interfaces with the universe. And they go into their back room at their temple or wherever they're at, and they get all their guys together, their shakers and movers of the civilization, of the society, powerful, influential people, and they say, we're going to have this map for the next 50 years, and this is how we're going to implement changes according to this overall map of the psyche of humanity, and influencing, pressing, putting pressure here, and we're going to rearrange things to change, to bring about this overall view in the larger world, the aspect of humanity, starting with this city, and then the next, and the next, and the next, we own everything. And we're going to result in this type of change, which is going to be a different community that we're going to also rule in. The idea is you can look at it as, what is one thing? Children have games when parents want to keep them busy. So we'll become the father of men, and we'll create games to keep them busy. And sports and gambling and all this stuff will be used, okay? So now we have a world where that dominates, and literally people are just like going mindlessly drooling at sports and games and TV shows and stuff like that. So they create it. The idea is this. As soon as they put on paper, they have a room, and whatever happens in that room, it's only the top people. Only the top. You've probably had to go through the maximal amount of degrees that you can go to and still remain a human in order to get to that room. In that room, what is discussed is only what is going to go on paper. What is going to go on paper is only what is going to be implemented in society. And what is implemented in society is only what comes from the leaders top down into the masses of society, which results in the next age of whatever is going to be done. Whatever the trends are, whatever it is. They're mapped out bit by bit until you get to a complete revolution. One thing I forgot to say in the talk is that how change has to happen eventually. It's like the cells. Eventually, every cell in your body is regenerated. It has to happen. Eventually, everything has to get a whole new system. So that's basically the idea of change. Well, they map out every cell from there on, or every organ system, until eventually a whole new system, a whole new world, a whole new culture is invented. And they do that every age until they get to the big whatever it's going to be. The idea is, because of the way reality works, they constructed an interdimensional circuit board between the paper in that room, the minds of the people in that room, and the minds of humanity, and the material, the building, the streets, the biological people, the whatever you want to call the culture, the substance of that. And they made a circuit board interdimensionally out of all of that. Because whatever goes on paper, all they have to do is write it down. Everybody's going to have funny hats. They leave it there. As soon as they go and look, they begin to see people beginning to have funny hats and wear things differently. It's because eventually whatever takes place there will be brought out, will be implemented, will be given to the leaders, will come down through top-down, trickling down of information and become part of reality. Because it was so certain and their power was so sure, all they had to do was write it in that book and they would begin to happen. They would still have to, in the weeks to come, implement it, give it to the top leaders or celebrities or whatever it is, and the teachers and the universities and the presidents and politicians, and let it trickle down. But the beginning effects of it, all they had to do was write on that book, and it would begin to happen. Because it was interdimensionally linked. And that's how it is a type of computational system. Because the way time works, wherever the information, the causality is flowing, the universe will begin to fill in the blanks and bring that into a reality. So it's technically not, but it technically is. Then they put up big harmonized like tuning forks of electromagnetic super powerful generators, and they connect that to the system, and now it's literally like a supercomputer pulsing out how reality is going to work by going right into the brains of the people and the masses and getting them to create that overall effect. Now, they cut out the middleman, basically, and it's just a system that does it. But before, in the 1800s, the 1700s, whatever, 1600s, 1100s, they used that, and that's how they began to know that it's all like circuitry, but it's just, it doesn't have a circuit. The circuit board is life itself. It's the universe itself. It's the fabric of universe, and the way your mind is connected to this overall ether. That what you put out is going to come back. They figured out it's the masses that overall create the substance, the continuity of this realm. They have a direct aspect, because they have so much money and power, the direct avenue into affecting the minds of the masses. They tie that directly into a certain group or situation, whatever it is. All you have to do is utter the word in that situation, and it would begin to flourish and blossom out in society, because eventually it would get implemented. And in that sense, it's like magic. It's 100% like magic. You could say that, yeah. It technically didn't, because it occurred, that's where they found it out, but in finding it out, that's where it's going to occur. Technically, it occurred when something impacted this realm, this planet, whatever you want to call it, and introduced genetic effects that warped the mind into not seeing outside of the perceptual blinders that we have built into our culture, our system, that are everywhere now. They're abhorrent and everywhere. They're all over reality. It's apparent and abhorrent. And that was the beginning of like this cosmic insanity, which they say is related to a black goop that basically, in one reality, it was flew in on a meteor, and another one it was like dropped off through an interdimensional, like a wormhole opening by some species. There's multiple explanations, because there's multiple layers of reality, which I didn't even begin to talk about. The 8 civilizations? I'm messing up my numbers now. I think it's actually 9 civilizations. But there's, or maybe it's 7. I don't know, I have to look back at the notes. There's multiple civilizations. I think it was 9, and there's actually other, but that's like the number that people will understand. And they're like time layers, and each time layer has its own version of Earth. Each civilization that happened, something happened. something messed stuff up. And each one is a different event. It's a different way of describing it. Like it's a big dream system. That's also why it's kind of like a computational system. It gets real weird. Basically, you can't prove to yourself that it's a computational system or a dream system, that there's basically no one reality until you're prepared to handle it, because your mind will cut it out. But in that sense, there is no one timeline or version of what happens. As soon as you, it's like a dream where you turn around and you're in a different environment. As soon as if you were to disconnect from this world fully and reconnect, something would be different, because it wouldn't keep everything exactly the same for you during that like gap. There would have to be some initiation of a change, because your reality varied from the consensus or the masses. That's also what the bases are. They're so far out of view that you can go down and come up to any of the parallels. It's a gateway to the parallels. That's why they're built on vortex points, which are natural magnetic mountains where there are funnelings of energy, this electromagnetic field energy, because the magnetosphere is the same in all the realities. The changing environment is different in each one. The magnetic field connects to all of the realities. The physical environment and the perceptual system is bounded, to each one reality, is restricted to each one. That's where seeing beyond the perception, seeing beyond the body, is the access point to these other realities, and that's where these experiments in the underground bases began. But the point is, it technically began wherever that war incursion happened, the war between heaven and hell on Earth, or over Earth in the souls of humanity. That's what it's called. It's been recorded for all time, Time Wars. But it only begins to have an effect when you realize that, which began it began with these secret groups, but it began happening wholesale, you could say, in the underground bases. They figured out a way to awaken people. And I'm telling you, nobody's going to like it, but it's what it is. You have to go through death. And that's not even the bad part, but yeah. Like, I didn't even get to the part that I asked you about, or you asked me about. Or anyway. I mean, it did, but I wonder... it's a good way to put it with the city like a dream catcher. And as well, the geometric patterns are for knowing how to deviate from the system, which is basically pre-planned, and it tries to make your energy, everything, your waves fit into. Basically, your energy outside the body is like the intricacies of the brain without substance. It's just floating in air. The soul magnets attempt to orient yours all like a magnet of a magnetic field into what it's basically shaped as. It's like it tries to take your circle and make it a triangle or something. If it has that, it can hold on to you. If it makes your stuff polarized to a certain shape or pattern, then it can actually grasp you and pull you around. That's more or less what happened. You do have free will, but it's whether you can use the free will or not. The point is, you have to go through death and the fear of death in order to get to it, because fear and pleasure is used against you. Because if you don't have the ability to overcome what your brain does through the extra-dimensional sense, then the electromagnetic form that you assume outside the body will still follow the impulses of a brain or a pseudo-brain, a soul magnet. Which is why all the people who are entrained by their brain and body, which is by this world, get sucked into that autonomy, that degradation outside the system. And the point is, these situations where there are methods for awakening are methods used to activate the soul level awareness in the human being. It's like if you have, there's a labyrinth that you have to get through, and you go up to the door to get through it, and there's a boulder that comes down and basically smashes you. That happens the first time. The system gets restarted, you get put back in front, you dodge out the way of the boulder, and you see there's a key on the back of it as it rolls over perfectly like where your path is. You don't get the key, so you sit in that room until, I don't know, the floor falls out or something like that. You go, and it's all, you're horrified throughout every aspect of it. The thing smushes you, you think you're dead. You run out of options, the room bursts into flames, you think you're dead. Every time, it's massively, traumatizing. So the next time, but the point is with this, every time your memory gets wiped, and you don't get to keep the memories of They create a soul trap system within a boundary and throw your ass in it. And when you get through that system, you can get through what apparently an alien ant farm system, some torture demigod being set up for us in this realm. But it's torturous. But the idea is that's what's out here. And the idea is you don't know there's a key behind the boulder, but as you go to open the door, you get the feeling that you're about to die a horrible death, because that's happened 10 times before, and your memory's wiped. So you open the door and jump back, and the boulder goes and you grab the key, which slides right in front of your face at just the right time, and all that happens because you learn to listen to the intuition, the awareness that's beyond the physical. They set up systems like that where you'll get burst into flames in a clone body or in a simulator or whatever it is, and it doesn't have to be that way. That's just the accelerated version, which you can get with advanced technology. Without that, there's just little mind games and board games, whatever it is, but it'll be a wager to the point where, the secret societies, the bloodline families, whatever it is, you owe me, $100,000 if you lose this chess game, or I bet you I can get that group of people to think this way and say these words at this time tomorrow, and I'll bet you, half of your something, your house or whatever like that. I don't know what it is. But the point is, it's extreme wagers and it's extreme ability to use the mind, because that's what's required to leave this place or to navigate out. But the idea is those specific methods of through basically extreme trauma or stress upon the mind makes it so that your memory can be wiped, and intuition will keep you alive from there on until you go through an 8-layer system or 9-layer veils, where there's a door, then a place you have to crawl under, then something you have to reach behind and grab something, and there's darts going by you and a trap floor and alligators, and by the time you get through it, you'll get through it without ever having known you knew any of it beforehand, because your mind will be completely wiped and it'll be as if you telepathically know. But the point is, you'll have gone through it 100 times before, because and each time they don't give you drugs for the pain or limit the amount of suffering. It's fully in suffering. But that makes it so that basically you have mind, a brain, physical storing of memory, and then you have that memory that's out. Remember, the soul level, the magnetic level. And it's actually spiritual, because soul is an in-between, which there's no soul outside the matrix system. It's not needed. But the idea is, or they're all together as one, and then it's not a soul, it's a higher being. Only when it shines down here do we say there's soul aspects and things like that. But in that sense, through that extreme stress, you'll get the soul memory activated. Or through extreme pleasure, where you're in love with somebody or there's something like that. So it's like your enemies, your worst enemies, and your closest family and lovers, you'll remember forever. And they stay with you in the afterlife, if you will. But the idea is tweak that, use that system to figure out how to program yourself to automatically begin to defeat these soul trap mind entrainment systems that run off of fear and distraction and us going frantic and not knowing what to do, and false pleasure or illusory pleasure. And they skip the false pleasure out altogether and say, screw it, don't give in to pleasure, don't give in to that, learn how to handle that. Then learn how to handle and use fear and torture or suffering or whatever it is. That way, somebody comes to you and says, this is real nice, come into this false afterlife, I'm your forgotten lover or whatever it is, and beaming you with good energy, and they teach you to don't give in to that, just an illusion. And then if he or she or whoever it is, that AI, Satan thing or demon thing or whatever it is, tries to force you and put fear into you and trick you, well, now you've been trained your entire life to figure out how to defeat that and ascertain the truth and go around that and disable the deceiver. So if you go through that process, these programs of these situations, you're basically immortal, because the trap that keeps people into a degrading system doesn't work anymore. It teaches you how to overcome it. The point is, if you don't embrace that, it won't work and you'll go soft. If you embrace that and your entire life is about literally shunning the illusion and grabbing it and doing away with it, killing the illusion, killing the ego, then it won't work. Because that's all they know how to do. The beings that create this illusion, this false afterlife, they don't actually know how a person thinks. They just know fluffy stuff and, angle the light this way, and they'll be afraid if it's real dark, and they'll like it if you beam this energy out and activate their sacral and pineal chakra and things like that. That's all they know. They know programming. They're basically AI programmers, or programs actually, but they don't actually know your perspective. So if you disable the part of you that's weak enough to believe in that and fall for that, you become immortal because that's all they know how to do, and that's what these systems do by teaching a person through these more or less traumatizing. Basically at first it's traumatizing for everybody. It's the same thing though if you take a person out their current system and say, look, here's the veil that is projected by the moon. It makes you have an IQ that's proportionally lessened from what you would normally have, and everybody's mentally retarded. Here, there's a shielded area, now there's no veil here. Look at the Earth, and all you see is interdimensional beings raping humans and war and pollution, and it's like, like kills you. Like, it literally just kills a person on the spot. It's the same thing if we take a person and put them through a system that is frightening, only the result is that they are immortal now, and they can exist beyond the parameters of the confines of the so-called Matrix. That's just my explanation and excuse for it. But I'm not in that business, and technically nobody is. There is no public service or, what is it called? I can't think of the word. Public relations for the secret societies and the people who rule over this planet. There is, but they're all part of the joke. Because if you still need that and you're relying on a fairy tale story to make you feel all fluffy inside, they're going to lie to you and try to keep you in their world matrix and use your soul for fuel. That's the whole point. The truth is simply the truth, and that's the truth, that we're in a shitty situation, more or less. And so it gets worse before it gets better, but anybody can do it with the desire to do it. That's all it takes, is the intent and the desire. And if you're in one of these systems, they know what they're doing, otherwise you wouldn't be here. Everybody who's saying, this happened to me, so on and so forth, if it was truly to destroy everything, they wouldn't be here. And sure, there are factions that do want to destroy people and turn them into food, but then that's even more of a credence for the truth, because then there's some faction that's protecting people. If they do have the power to destroy everybody, then how are we here in the first place? Either they can't actually do it, or they're not trying to actually do it, or there's somebody protecting people. There's only 3 possible options, or where some people are masterfully immune and they're like superheroes. Because, there's all these wars and scalar machines and technology, internet technology, but some people can sit here and talk about it and nothing bad happens. So those are the possibilities that, or everybody's making it up and there's a big fluffy rainbow at the end of your life. Whatever you want to think. And the other thing is that nobody really dies. It has to be a form of technology that we basically turn into light, and that the act of dying is an illusion. It's an inserted memory, which is the same thing as certain aspects of our history, which is weird. But yeah, everybody can go through that, and that's the requirement for going through death. It sounds like a lot, but how do you think you got here in the first place? Was it just like a train ride you hopped on and floated down into the 3rd dimension? No, it was a fall from grace, a dropping down from a high dimension into a low vibration, and now we're stuck here. It's literally like a fish going into the fish trap, and now it can't get back out through the same way it came in. Or a crab or something like that. But it's possible. Easy. All I can really tell you is what I was told. And I can tell you how I feel, but it's not as interesting as what I was told. Because everybody wants to feel a certain way. But it would seem that this is an illusion that is made to mimic a higher realm and a higher being that basically looks just like this, but it would be like a fairy tale compared to this one, where energy is constantly vampired, or it's like vampirically reduced through that Fibonacci sequence. And in the original Earth, it's an abundance of energy, and everything basically is teeming with life, in the sense that you would have to eat like once a month or once a week or never at all. And the point of we have to eat to stay alive here, well, it's almost as if the opposite happens there. Like outside of this realm, we have to fight to keep our ego, because there's not any energy and stuff going on. There's a billion different things happening at once. Different lives, different essences. So in the original Earth, it's as if instead of energy slowly reducing unless you eat, and you have to continually pile in food and energy and build it up and up, and I'm just constantly going down, it's the opposite. And energy is constantly filling. We have to find something to do with all this energy, because we're basically going to explode if we'll turn into a star if we don't do anything. And so what we do is not eat, but we create lives and worlds and essences and beings and shows and kind of like interdimensional mystical dream experiences. And we do that every time we would eat in this realm. In the original realm, we do that and create these dreams, which turn out into be reality bubbles. Apparently somebody caught one of those bubbles and put a little net around it and started growing beings within it, which is a really weird way to look at it. But mathematically and scientifically, in terms of entropy and neg-entropy, something Dan Winter talks about a lot, that's how it would work. It's like the opposite of the realm. Has to do with the limit of the speed of light and a whole bunch of things like that. Biology or DNA being able to actually create the energy that we seem to need to require, literally need to require, which we don't actually need to require. And in that sense, the story is that this is a computational environment that is actually the pseudo version of the real thing. This is what I didn't want to say before, which I was going to speak to people directly on the YouTube channel and say, because that's pretty much what you would kind of want. But somebody else did start to speak about this, and there's been one or two or like 3 or 4 people who have mentioned this in previous times in history. They told us in the 70s all this technology went off, all different groups began to get advanced technology. In the 80s, they began to notice a lot of funky things happening with the timeline and the atmosphere. In the 90s, they put out a bunch of notices saying that it looks like the atmosphere and the system of life here is going to shut off, that it's like blinking in and out, and the sun is showing these crazy solar outputs, and it looks like it's a system that's flipped on and off with a light switch, and it instantly all appears like it's a video game or something like that. It's material, but the material is literally in this propagated reality system. Like we're in a computational system right now. It just looks like it's telling our brains to have space and feel air in between it, and it's like just one layer of computer disk or something like that, and that it's going to basically annihilate. It's going to auto-annihilate. They told me, you might want to, I don't know, do what you do to relax or something. They told me that happened in 2000 and the system shut off and basically Earth died and humanity more or less died. And this is real hard to understand. I've wept, for days over this, because you gotta think these are Nazi scientists either pulling the hood over my eyes and effing around when they have literally trillions upon unlimited funds. They can I've seen them make matter out of thin air. They found ancient technology which you plug into your neural system, your spiritual, biological system, and it can allow you to control the weather and control the atoms of the environment through your mind. They found ancient technology that has always been written about that allows you to do this and open up gateways and so on and so forth. And they're going to tell me this then. So they told me that, and they said that the scientists of the time debated and decided that the best thing to do would be to construct a neural simulator that they could activate and locate or transport all the surviving aspects of humanity into, and that they uploaded humanity into a simulator, a cosmic or universe simulator. It's actually called the Earth simulator, but they have the extended universe and cosmic simulators, which show basically everything outside of time from our perspective. It shows all of history that has been, and apparently all that is to be or could come if we get over this situation that we're basically stuck in. Their plan was to put us into the simulator, and apparently it worked. Put us into the simulator, have us, the majority, stay in basically an automated artificial environment until they could figure out the workarounds to develop technology that would be advanced enough to transfer the spiritual components of people into higher dimensions, and as well basically allow people to naturally ascend more or less without that technology, but it doesn't make sense because everything is technology, and access the higher dimensions through their own birthright, which is what their original soul blueprint basically signs up for. It's really weird how time works. And so that we're in this delay, repeat, loop cycle thing until it was figured out, and that now that we're nearing the time where all of this is coming out is because they figured it out, and naturally the realm is going to begin to shift into what it's supposed to be. It's as if it overlays over this realm, which doesn't really make sense, but the universe in that sense shifts to match us in our minds and heads, and then we go into the actual universe where we're kind of taken out of it to get plopped into the simulator, which literally in an abstract space, apparently in shielded areas deep underground, running in these powerful quantum supercomputer systems that are capable of literally creating universes inside themselves. I don't know how to take it either. I didn't, at least for 7 years. I just said whatever, fuck it, excuse my language. But a few years ago that changed, a couple years, literally a year ago. And now I'm here telling people about it. And other people have been through this as well. If we could all get on the same page, and if we're not on the same page, but we don't have a physical anchor and we left the system, we would just dissolve. We would literally go and just dissolve into the atmosphere or the void space, the abyss. Apparently that happened the last universe. Nobody had a backup plan. Well, they did, but it was too much. There was warring and crazy stuff going on, and I was there for it, and I even had a part in messing a lot of stuff up, if you want to say that. Although I didn't do it directly, it was the fact that we were trying to help, and certain people did naughty things that ruined the universe and collapsed the fabric of the universe. But the idea is that, yeah, so basically there's a, if we dissolve and go into the abyss, it means our minds stay there, and we go into a temporal dilation field that is the length of one complete universe, meaning we're sitting in the dark with no bodies and no distance between us, just a one big mass of mind with nothing to do, no ability to change anything. All we can do is sit there and think and bicker, and or ascend, and we get this heavenly, like the angels on top with like the Godhead, and then like the demons below, and we make one of those like Fabergé egg painting things, like something like that. Point is, apparently that happened in the previous universe, and the people who are here and connected to what is known as the demiurge are, and it's actually an improper way of explaining it, is connected to the fallen spirits, which is basically the same way of explaining it, are those who came out of that simulated system, or it's not even simulated, it came out of the abyss, the abyss where Earth died and everything ended, and they stayed for the amount of time of one complete universe, bickering with each other and degrading into these fallen beings that are no longer human in mind and they're in spirit. There's just basically darkness there. There's just 100% desire, and it's like having a itch you can't scratch, but it's your whole being, and it's all of time. And they became fallen beings, entities, like demons. Those are some of the bloodline families that were here in this place, and it's because the people who were here that began to go into the occult to open up these gateways contacted these entities and said, come on in, we can use you as a military force. We can, if we have you on our side, we'll have the whole world, we'll have all the power. And of course, that's what starts the time loop. You get it? It's a paradox that leads back into itself. Apparently, because we're aware of it, it's resolving. However, you know, that's going to work, which means we basically went into an alternate dimension and jumped track, and now we created a universe, as you said, just because this is becoming more of a public concept. And that's why it's happening. And we're in this weird part where now we're going to watch what it's going to do and how it's going to play out and who's really in control. The system itself, no one's in control. That's the point. It's literally just like horses running on a carriage down, you know, an alleyway. And there's computer systems that are set up to both act as safeguards and as well act as military mind control systems to propel and continue the desires of certain factions when they're no longer basically capable to do it themselves. But the point is that our attention, our intention, and lower energy is what fuels those systems. So all we have to do is awaken, and everything solves. And as well, those are the systems that are echoing back in time, creating anchor points, which create the current present in a certain way where we don't have high technology. A lot of stuff is lost. A lot of IQ is limited. Basically, those systems dissolve once we go to high awareness. There's like triggers and I don't know, like safety resets and all this weird stuff that goes on that those systems shut off. And apparently, it's an Earth defense, like autonomous system that is built into what you could call the master program of Earth, of this environment, where once our energy goes high, it steps in and clears the plane. And all the negativity has to get wiped out or recycled, that it can't stay because it's the masses making a decision for the first time finally, and as soon as that happens, it means, you did it, you became self-aware. You all stood up and said, this is what we want. When do we want it? Now. And it means you're here. It's kind of like a doctor hitting your funny bone on the knee. I can't think of the word. And your knee rises or hits your funny bone and you feel it. You give them a response or shining the light in your eyes and they dilate. It means you actually exist. You're awake and aware and alert, and there's actually a person here. If that happens, there's somebody knocking on the cosmic door and everybody's just like, booty shaking videos. What's on TV next? It means we're sleeping. It means we're in a coma. So, but the point is, our waking from that coma, it activates these autonomous systems which basically protect humanity. And that's how it's all set up, and it's all set up to succeed. Which is very strange, but it's not simple. It is simple. It's just, I don't know. It's so much more than what you would expect, but it's also not. It's not like It's not like a sci-fi stupid movie or something like that. It seems like normal. Like if somebody had this ability to construct realms or to alter realms, an Earth defense system, and these beings who are contacting on the spiritual plane, the physical plane, to get to the spiritual plane that they got separated from, and control factions that want to use these beings and all that, it all makes sense, at least to me. It's however many layers of information can be held at one time. And apparently it's 9 civilization worths at once. That's the actual appearance. That's what it looks like. It's a good show. That's what I say, and that's what a lot of us say. Although there are problems, and they can't sit here and be like, well, I can handle it. That's absolutely insane, but it's great. Because there are some people that are like, what is going on? Like, what are the people and this and that? What are we going to do? You know, we can help them, and so we have to help them if we want to. And it's not as confusing, like, what can we do? We'll just basically reach out. All we can do is reach out to people and begin to put ourselves in the collective mind. It doesn't, basically, if there's resistance, then that's not the way it should happen immediately. There's obviously always going to be resistance, but if it's literally like, well, this is impossible. You know, if I try this, it's going to take 10 to 20 to 90 years to get it right. Well, then don't do that. Do something else. That's the whole point. And the point is, you can do in any situation 10 things that are free and will reach 1,000 people. That you can just put some information out there, especially mainly with the internet. Which is also weird because now it's like, we're already becoming a cosmic technological mind. That's possibly the Kickstarter for the collective mind. To realize, oh, this is going on in, you know, Nigeria and Iraq and Russia and Serbia, Ukraine and Mexico, and all this is happening, and it's because this device can show us that, you know, there's obviously room for error there, but clearly it's a step up from the television, and as well, it's causing a collective uprising of self-awareness, which is there's the two maps. One group's going to do it through horror and terror and waking people up through fear, and one group's going to do it through knowledge and awakening through like a motivation to learn more. And when those two are perfectly balanced, we're not like animals anymore. But you don't want to reduce everything because then the whole show is basically over.